All right, we are back for part 2. Let's go ahead and get that PowerPoint open. All righty, so we left off on gnathostome fossils. So another group of jawed vertebrates is called acanthodians. They radiated during the Silurian and the Devonian periods, which is about 444 to 359 million years ago. The placoderms were extinct by 359 million years ago, and they were followed by those acanthodians about 70 million years later. I know it doesn't quite fall into that amount, but those are the numbers that your textbook gives. Just remember, anytime you see nice big estimations like this, they're estimations because they're literally guesstimates, because they are getting the information from the surrounding rock and the isotopes that are in the surrounding rock. And so it has to be an estimation on the group of between the years. And so the 3 surviving lineages of jawed vertebrates are going to be chondrichthyans, your ray fin fishes, and your lobed fin fishes. And by 420 million years ago, those guys evolved, and they are what represents our organisms currently. All righty, so let's go ahead and get into the chondrichthyans. Your chondrichthyans are going to be your sharks, your rays, and their relatives. They have skeletons that are mainly made out of cartilage. They are the largest, most diverse group of chondrichthyans. That largest group is going to include your sharks, your rays, and your skates. And so a second group is composed of a few dozen species of what is called ratfishes or chimeras. And so you can see here, this is your black tip reef shark. It's got your dorsal fins, pectoral fins, right? And then your pelvic fins. And so this is going to be your stingray. Your stingray is considered a chondrichthyan. And then this is your spotted ratfish. And so he also chondrichthyan. He looks like it. So your sharks have streamlined bodies, okay? Very fast swimmers. I'm sure you've seen that on Shark Week. And so the dorsal fins are going to function as stabilizers. And with the pectoral fins and the pelvic fins, they're used for maneuvering. You will also find sharks using those fins during mating too, in order to stabilize their potential mate. And so continual swimming is going to keep sharks from sinking, because they have to continuously have water flowing over their gills. And so they have to continuously swim. Your largest sharks are going to be suspension feeders, believe it or not. To have the very largest shark eat the very smallest organisms is just crazy. But most of your other sharks are going to be carnivores. And so your sharks, they have a short digestive tract with a spiral valve that is going to increase the surface area, and it slows down the passage of food. That way, what it eats, it can digest and get the most nutrients out of it. And so if you can slow down digestion, you can get more nutrients out of it. They also have very acute senses that include sight, smell, and the ability to detect electrical fields from other animals nearby. And so that really is a great adaptation for their carnivorous lifestyle. So I just need to check real quick that I am still recording. Just give me the moment. Having a little bit of a blip here. Okay, I just wanted to double check because it said share microphone in my bottom corner. So, right, back to our PowerPoint. Okay, so your sharks. Your sharks are fertilized internally, but your embryos can come about in 3 different ways. So this is definitely vocabulary that you absolutely should know. Oviparous, ovoviviparous, and viviparous. And so what oviparous is when the eggs hatch outside of the mother's body. So the mother expels the eggs and the eggs hatch outside the body. You're going to see this very applicable to other eggs that we talk about too. Ovoviviparous, that is when the eggs are retained within the oviduct and the eggs are hatched inside the uterus. And so the young are born after hatching within the uterus, ovoviviparous. And the third term, viviparous, that is when the embryo develops within the uterus and is nourished from the mother's blood through a yolk sac placenta. Okay, so that is your shark eggs are going to develop in those different ways. It depends on the shark. So your reproductive tract and excretory system and digestive system empty into one little tunnel, and that is called the cloaca. If you are familiar with birds, you will be familiar with that term cloaca also. It is a common chamber that opens to the outside. Hi, my friends. Give me just one moment, please. All righty. So your rays, most of your rays are going to be bottom dwellers. They feed on mollusks and crustaceans. They're flattened, have enlarged pectoral fins. And those are those fins that look like water wings, those enlarged pectoral fins. Many of them have whip-like tails. Some species, the tail has venomous barbs for defense. And so, believe it or not, I'm sure you have heard about Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter, how he was killed with one of these venomous barbs. It was actually accidental. This is not something that they chose to do to him. It just happened that they saw him at the moment as a, I don't want to say a threat, but yeah. And so anyway, chondrichthyans. So your chondrichthyans are severely threatened by your overfishing. And so shark populations in the Pacific have gone down up to 95%. 95% of the population has been diminished. And so your ray fin fishes, that leads to your ray fin fishes and your lobe fin fishes. And so a majority of your vertebrates are going to be osteichthyans. I don't know if I said that right, but we're working on it. Nearly all of them have what is a bony endo meaning inside, endoskeleton. They include your bony fishes and your tetrapods. And your aquatic osteichthyans they are vertebrates that are informally called fishes. And so let's go ahead and go to those groups and see those characteristics. And so most of your fishes are going to breathe by pulling in water. Sorry about that. Today's been a hard day with the coughing. So most of your fishes are going to breathe by drawing water over their gills, and that is protected by an operculum. And so your fish are going to control their buoyancy with an air sac called a swim bladder. That's why when you see fish just seem like they are suspended in water and they don't move, that is because they can control the amount of air in their swim bladder. And it's what makes them not sink and not float. It keeps them in the perfect area that they want to be. The skin is going to secrete mucus, and it's covered by flattened bony scales in most of your fishes. As discussed before, your fishes have a lateral line system that is that very sensitive line system that picks up vibrations. Most of your species are going to be oviparous, but some have internal fertilization and birthing. Excuse me. So here is your great anatomy of your fish. I'm really not going to go into it too much because we are going to cover this in depth when we do our lab dissections. So your ray fin fishes, Actinopterygii, there are going to include your familiar aquatic osteichthyons. And so your ray fin fishes originated in the Silurian period, 444 to 419 million years ago. Fins are going to be supported by long, flexible rays, hence the ray fin fish. Those have been modified for maneuvering, defense, and other functions too. Here's some examples. You have your yellowfin tuna, your red lionfish, common seahorse, and your moray eel. Two of those guys make really, really good sushi. They say, here's the deal. Some people eat lionfish. I wouldn't because they are poisonous. And from what I understand, if they are not cooked correctly, you might not live out the experience. So do your research. It could be conjecture. Alrighty. So anyway, humans, they have harvested those ray fin fishes for thousands of years. Why? Because they're yummy. On an industrial scale, fishing has driven many fisheries to collapse. So it's one of those things, you got a good thing, so it's exploited. And when you exploit it, then it goes bye-bye. And so that's not good because it negatively impacts the ecosystem. Also, ray fin fishes are negatively impacted by dams that can change water flow patterns. That affects their ability to capture prey, their ability to migrate, their ability to spawn. And so building dams can actually dam them. All right, lobe fin fishes. Sarcopterygii. It originated also in the Silurian period. They have rod-shaped bones surrounded by thick layer of muscle in their pelvic and pectoral fins. And so it is thought that ancient species, they maneuvered across substrate of aquatic habitats. And you see this in some living species. So I want to find this guy. Oh my gosh. We'll come back to the coelacanth. So anyway, when you look at this is your ancient lobe fin fish. Give me a moment. So I will use this guy as an example. And so 3 different lineages survive, including the coelacanths, lungfishes, and tetrapods. The coelacanths were originally thought to become extinct 75 million years ago, but they have actually found a living coelacanth off the coast of South Africa, 1938. And so obviously this guy here in his gear for scuba diving is not from 1938 because you've seen scuba gear from that time. So as you can see, they are still around. Excuse me, but I want to show you the muscularity in the fins. So you can see this fin here and the muscularity in it. It is thought that obviously not this one specifically due to its massive size, but the earlier lobefin fishes used those muscular fins to actually move themselves around, like this says, on the substrate of aquatic habitats. And so think about it this way. If you can imagine a tidal pool, I might have to cut this down. I might have to be done, guys. If you can imagine a tidal pool and you have several different tidal pools, you get fish caught in the tidal pool, but because of these strong legs, then it's possible that they can actually maneuver themselves from one tidal pool to the next tidal pool. And that even more so with the lungfishes. They hence, quote, hold their breath while they move from one pool to the next. And this in turn, what led to the possible evolving of your early amphibians. So your living lungfishes are all found in Southern Hemisphere. So we're not going to have representatives where we are. Through those gills, there are main organs for gas exchange. They can also surface and gulp air into the lungs. Like I told you, they can, quote, hold their breath. And the third surviving lineage of the lobefin fish is that tetrapod. The tetrapods are the groups that have adapted to life on land. I'm really sorry you have to hear all this, but I got to keep going for you guys. So one of the most significant events in history was when the fins of some of the lobe fins evolved into limbs. This is exactly what I was telling you a few slides back. So the limbs and the feet of the tetrapods. And so your tetrapods, ones on land, basically diversified and adaptive radiation all throughout the land. So characteristics of your tetrapods and their adaptations. So 4 limbs with feet and digits, a neck. That neck allows separation and the head to move separately from the rest of the body. The fusion of the pelvic girdle to the backbone. The lack and absence of gills, except for some remaining aquatic species. And then for your ears to detect airborne sounds. Now that these organisms are on land, they needed the ability to hear in the air versus feel vibrations within the water. So the origin of those tetrapods, Tikalik it was nicknamed a fish pod. It showed both fish and tetrapods characteristics. The traits that it shared included your fins, gills, lungs, and scales. And so other traits shared with tetrapods, but not including fish, was the fact that tetrapods, remember, we're not talking about fish, we're talking about tetrapods, that ribs to breathe air and support its body, neck and shoulders. Wait, did I? Yeah, we're good. We're good. Neck and shoulders, movement of the head, that's repetitive. Front fins within a bone pattern of that tetrapod limb. You have a pelvis and a rear fin that are larger and more robust than those found in the fish. So here is Tikalik. If you go to the Museum of Natural History, you will see this guy also. Okay, so he could most likely prop himself up on his fins and walk in water, but it's unlikely that he walked on land. This guy would, he allowed paleontologists to reconstruct the evolution of the original tetrapod limb. And so the first tetrapods appeared 365 million years ago and diversified over the course of 60 million years, which is actually very rapid. So when you look here, when you look at that diversification, here is that Silurian period that we talked about before. Here's the Devonian, here's your Carboniferous, and then your Permian, and this right here on 0, this is current time. And so you can see your lungfishes were early in evolution. And then it moved on to the other different groups, and I'm not going to name them all. I'm not going to go through them. I barely could talk. But what's my point to show you? My point to show you is the diversification of the limb and how you have your very similar bones and yet very different, the different representations of those specific bones. And so you hear the orange is the ulna. Here's your ulna here, ulna, 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 ulna. And then so you got your radius, boom, 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 lacking radius in the lungfishes. And then the humerus. See, we thought it was funny, but it wasn't. There's a humerus there. Okay, so that is showing that unity, but yet diversity and the acquiring of many different traits throughout time, the acquiring and retaining of those traits and modifications. I'm so sorry, guys. All right, we're good now. Amphibians. Your amphibians in the class Amphibia, we have 6,150 species in 3 different clades. You got your salamanders, your frogs, and your apoda, which are your legless amphibians. And so when you look here, your salamanders, your frogs, and your apoda. This looks like a snake, but it is not. It is a legless amphibian. And so in your salamanders, they are amphibians with tails. Some are going to be aquatic, others live on land as adults or throughout their lifetime. Patamorphosis, this is a term you should be familiar with. What patamorphosis is, it's the retention of a juvenile feature in a mature, a sexually mature organism or an adult. And so it holds on to those juvenile features. It's very common in your aquatic salamanders. And so you got your frogs. Your frogs do not have your tails. They lack tails. They have powerful hind limbs for locomotion on land. And so I'm sorry, I should be specific. The adults lack tails, okay? Your frogs have, with leathery skin, are going to be called toads. And then your apoda are going to be legless, nearly blind, as you can see. he's lacking eyes, very, very, very tiny, tiny, useless eyes. Resembles earthworm, but they are not. No legs, and that is a secondary adaptation. So what amphibian means both ways of life. Okay, so that refers to the metamorphosis of your aquatic larvae into terrestrial adult. And so, for example, the larval stage of the frog, which is the tadpole, is an aquatic herbivore with gills. And so it has a lateral line system and a long fin tailed. This is so very different than the adult. So during metamorphosis, the tadpole is going to develop legs, it's going to develop lungs, so it actually changes organs. It's going to develop a pair of external eardrums, which is called the tympanum, and then it is going to be carnivorous, meaning it changes its mode of nutrition. It went from being an herbivore to a carnivore. And so that specifically took place with the aid of the carnivorous digestive system. And so there's a whole different change in the actual internal organs through that metamorphosis. Oh, look at this. This is your cute little tadpole. And this is the process of metamorphosis. You can see he's not quite done yet. And then so when we are adults, here is your adult froggy, and they are in the midst of a lot of eggs within the water. So the big take home here that you absolutely should know is that your frogs are, or specifically, I shouldn't even just say your frogs, your amphibians are still dependent upon the water for their life cycle, for sexual reproduction. Okay, so they are incompletely adapted to land. Those are words that come across on test. Incompletely adapted to land, and they are still dependent upon the water for their mating. Okay, so that sounds very familiar. It almost sounds like bryophytes, doesn't it? And so, interesting. So some amphibians, like I said, are strictly aquatic. Some are strictly terrestrial, but most are at least found in damp habitats because they need water for their reproduction. And so most of the amphibians are going to have moist skin that complements the lungs for gas exchange. So it takes place during with the skin. Fertilization is external in most of your species, and the eggs require, like I told you, moist environment. They are incompletely adapted to the land because they're still dependent upon the water for their reproduction. So in some species, males or females can carry the eggs on their back, or they can carry them in their mouth, or they can carry them in their stomach. So yeah, amphibian populations, they have actually been declining. So if you ever want to see whether an ecosystem is healthy or not, ecologists will actually look towards the amphibian populations. And that can be a great predictor of whether or not an ecosystem is in trouble or whether it is healthy. And this is caused by a disease called causing chytrid fungus. It's also caused by habitat loss, climate change, and pollution. And so at least 9 amphibian species have become extinct in the past 40 years. More than 100 have not even been observed and are probably extinct. Moving on to your amniotes. Amniotes are going to be groups of tetrapods that have an amniotic egg. They're going to include your reptiles, including your birds, and your mammals. And so if you look here, here is your ancestral amniote. You got your diapsids and you got your synapsids, okay, in the direction of your synapsids. I'm going to go that way first because it makes it easy. Mammals, boom, move in that direction, mammals. Everybody else, diapsids. And so you can see here is a common ancestor of your reptiles. Okay, if you head This way, you got your archosaurs. Your archosaurs are going to lead to the lineage of your turtles. And then if you head to this branch, your crocodilians. Heading to the next branch, your pterosaurs. And so moving on, this is the section of your dinosaurs. So if you ever hear somebody call a pterosaur a dinosaur, it's not. It is not. And so, yeah. And so these are going to be your dinosaurs. And you got ornithischians, dinosaurs. And so then you got your Saurischians, dinosaurs. And then you have your birds. Okay, so your birds are going to fall in under your Saurischian dinosaurs. And so basically branches off as Saurischian dinosaurs other than birds and birds. So let's go ahead and head in this direction. Lepidosaurs. And then I skipped that middle. We'll go back to that here pretty soon. You got your Tutoras, your squamates, which is going to be your lizards and your snakes. All right, let's go off to these two little branches that are just by themselves. Plesiosaurus. Your plesiosaurus is going to be your Nessie, your Loch Ness monster. Okay, so there's no evidence that there is really a Loch Ness monster, but they like to go ahead and state that the Loch Ness monster is most likely a plesiosaurus. But like I said, that is a fictional type of animal. Plesiosaurus was very real though. And so moving on to your ichthyosaurus. Your ichthyosaurus, so this is not a shark and this is not a dolphin. And so this was representative of your, it was, I don't know how to say it, swimming aquatic organism that was prehistoric. All righty. A lot of times people call your plesiosaurus a dinosaur. And I just want to tell you, nope, it's not a dinosaur. If you recall, these are dinosaurs over here. Okay. So continuing with that amniotic egg. So amniotes are in the clade because they have an amniotic egg. And that is a membrane that protects the embryo. And what does it protect it from? It protects it from the external environment. It protects it from drying out. And so the amnion is going to enclose the embryo in a fluid-filled sac. And that is going to reduce the dependence of tetrapods upon the water for reproduction. Now, these amniotes can go further into land, into drier areas where they don't have to be dependent upon the water for the reproduction. And so when you look here, you can see you got your amnion, you got your embryo in here. Albumin is going to be the protein within the amniotic. So if you want to, and then here's your yolk, which is going to contain nutrients. The outer shell, that's going to be the harder shell that is going to contain all of this. As you can see here. So if you're cracking an egg, okay, you've seen yolk before. It's the yellow part of the egg. The albumin, that's the egg white. So this is a huge adaptation for life on land. Most of your reptiles and some of your mammals even have a shell. Yes, we are amniotes. We just have a modified version of that, and we'll get a chance to see that. So your amniotes, they have other terrestrial adaptations, and so they have relatively impermeable skin. They have the ability to use the rib cage to ventilate the lungs. This is important. Impenetrable skin. You have to, when you are on dry land, you have to be able to contain your water. The problem is water loss. And so having impermeable skin, that is going to counteract the problem of water loss and drying out. Rib cage to ventilate the lungs. You have to work against, or I should say work with the barometric pressure, because you are not using the water pressure in order to flow across your gills. Instead, you need to be able to get air into the lungs so that way that oxygen can be removed from it. And so early amniotes, they living amphibians, they split from that common ancestor about 350 million years ago. Okay, so the living amphibians, amniotes split. The early ones lived in warm, moist areas, but basically expanded into more diverse environments over that course of time. The earliest ones were small, predaceous lizards, sharp teeth. Later on, they include herbivores. Going into the clade of reptiles. So the reptile clade is going to include your tuartas, your lizards, snakes, turtles, crocodilians, birds, and some other extinct groups. And so your reptiles are going to have scales. That is what helps them have that waterproof barrier. Most of your reptiles are going to lay shelled eggs on land. Fertilization occurs internally before the eggshell is secreted. Most reptiles are ectothermic. Ectothermic means it absorbs external heat. It doesn't maintain its own body heat the way an endotherm is. An endotherm can maintain its body temperature through its own metabolism versus an ectotherm, its body temperature is very much like the environment that is in. So if it needs to be warm, it needs to move into the sun, it needs to move onto a rock, it needs to move onto a warmer area. If it needs to cool down, it needs to hide. It has to go underground. It has to go under a rock. It needs to go into the shade. And so it controls its body temperature by absorbing the external heat. And so fossil evidence is going to indicate that your earliest reptiles lived about 310 million years ago and resembled lizards. And so like all living reptiles, early reptiles were diapsids. And so a key character of those diapsids is that it has a pair of holes on each side of the skull behind the eye sockets. Through those holes, you're going to have muscles past that attach to the jaw. And so your diapsids are going to be composed of two big main lineages, lepidosaurs and archosaurs. Lepidosaurs, like I said earlier, when we were looking at the clay, tuartas, your lizard snakes, and your extinct mosasaurs. Your archosaurs are going to have the lineage that produce your turtles, crocodilians, pterosaurs, and your dinosaurs. So my favorite, actually, I think that pterosaurs are not my favorite. I like mosasaurs better. So your pterosaurs are still cool. They were the first pteropods to exhibit flapping flight. And so your pterosaurs went extinct by 66 million years ago. So very close around the time of dinosaurs, 65 to 66 million years ago. Your dinosaurs diversified into many different shapes and sizes. Remember, your pterosaurs are not dinosaurs. Your dinosaurs include herbivores with lots of adaptations for defense. Bipedal carnivores were called theropods. Bipedal means they walked on two legs. I think you've seen them before. They're the ones always in the movies chasing after people. And so those theropods are the ancestors to birds. So if I had to test you on something, I would probably test you the fact that a theropod is what led to the lineage of birds. And so in those fossil discoveries and research led to the conclusion that many dinosaurs were very agile, were very fast. Your paleontologists also discovered signs that they were really good parents, that they took care of their young. They didn't just drop them off and let their young just go about life and figure it out. And so There's also anatomical evidence that supports the hypothesis that some of your dinosaurs were endothermic and not ectothermic as what was once previously the working paradigm. So your dinosaurs, with the exception of your birds. So we keep saying that because when we talk about a bird, really a bird is included in the group of dinosaurs. So we have to specify out dinosaurs with the exception of the birds became extinct by the end of the Cretaceous, 66 million years ago. As you can see, there is a discrepancy here because in your previous chapters, it says 65 million years ago. So let's just go ahead and give a nice little grouping of 65 to 66 million years ago. So their extinction was partly caused by an asteroid. That is what they think. So your Lepidosaurs, one surviving lineage of them is going to be represented by your lizard-like reptiles called your Turatas. Those guys are going to be restricted to small islands off the coast of New Zealand. They are threatened because of the introduction of rats, and the rats consume their eggs, so they can't be successful at continuing their lineage. And so this is just a perfect example of invasive species. Okay. Now, when we look at this term, extant. Extant is the opposite of extinct. Extant is currently living. So these are your extant reptiles, other than your birds, because yes, birds are considered reptiles. Here's your tuatara right here. You have your Australian thorny devil lizard. He is just adorable. I think he looks like a really good pet, but not. Here's a nice little black-breasted hill turtle. Wagler's pit viper, not a good pet. And then you have your American alligator. Please don't have him as a pet, as some people do, and then toss him when he's too old and too big. All right, so other major living lineage of Lepidosaurs are going to include your squamates, which are your lizards and your snakes. And so your squamates are going to range a variety of sizes from 16 millimeters long all the way to 3 meters long. The Komodo dragon is that example. Your snakes are going to be legless lepidosaurs that evolved from lizards with legs. Snakes are carnivorous. They have adaptations to help in capturing, consuming prey. Those are going to be chemical sensors, heat detecting organs, venom, in some cases, not all cases, obviously, and then also loosely articulated jaw bones. This gives their mouth the ability to open up to be able to engulf large prey. And so when we talk about chemical sensors, they can sense heat. I'm sorry, no, I'm over here. I'm jumping. So your chemical sensors are going to be when they stick out their tongue and they can actually, quote, taste chemicals. I don't want to say they're tasting them, but essentially it's very similar. And so by doing that, they can detect other organisms that are nearby. So it would be equivalent to you smelling the armpit of your loved one. Yeah, I know that's really gross, but I don't know what else to tell you. All right. So heat detecting organs. So heat detecting organs are very important because they can actually detect a living organism, especially a mammal, because mammal are going to have a higher body temperature naturally. And say there's a bunch of leaf litter, and you can actually see the animal or the mammal, but they can actually see the heat in the pile of leaves and know that there's prey there. So venom, don't confuse venom with poison, okay? Venom comes from glands that are specifically connected to the snake's teeth. And so not to confuse with poisonous glands. So your venom is going to be injected into the prey. And the purpose of the venom is to subdue the prey, because it's actually really harmful for a snake to try to get prey. Because if you think about it, if a snake goes after a mouse, the mouse is going to fight. The mouse is going to bite. The mouse is going to scratch. It's going to squiggle. It's going to do what it has to do to get away. So the presence of venom, that is going to essentially protect the snake from the organism that it is trying to kill, it harming the snake. Also, what can happen is that snake can inject the venom, and it doesn't bother with the mouse anymore. It allows the mouse to scurry away. Okay. Then through those chemical sensors, it can sense its own chemical message of that venom, and it can follow the mouse where it ran away to die. So this gives the ability for him to basically search. And what this is called chemosensory searching. I actually, in my grad school, did research on chemosensory searching of the rattlesnake. And through that research, we determined that the longer that the mouse is gone away from the snake, the more that chemical is going to dissipate, and it's going to be harder for that snake to locate that mouse. And so basically, the sooner you let it go, we let it go in time intervals of immediately, time intervals of, I want to believe it was 30 minutes, 1 hour, 6 hours, 12 hours, and 24 hours. And so basically at 24 hours, pretty much that chemical searching was gone. But the sooner that snake can go ahead and search after that mouse after he's injected venom, the more concentrated that chemical, that venom is going to be, and he can search that mouse wherever he goes, wherever he runs off to die. So that's important, because a snake does not want to waste its venom on a mouse that he injects with the venom, and the mouse runs away and then he can't find the mouse. That is a waste of the snake's resources. And so I might be published out there. I don't know. I've looked for it. I can't find it. I graduated before the paper was written by my graduate advisors. So, all righty. So let's go ahead and move on to turtles. Actually, we're going to go ahead and take a break.